So in this episode, we are going to go over some tips of things that I learned on our trips to Kakwa Provincial Park. Kakwa Provincial Park is about a 3-hour drive from Prince George. You head east towards the Walker Forest Service Road, and you drive at least about 2.5 hours down that road. It's pretty rough, last several kilometers. And you park at the Bastille Bridge, and you make your way into the park. To get to the cabin, it's about a 30-kilometer hike, following the road that goes to the old mine at Babette Lake. But before you get to Babette Lake, you turn down to the cabin at Kakwa Lake. Anyways, we're going to cover a couple things that we learned about this park. It's really a world-class park. It's not visited nearly as much as some other places because it is hard to access. It takes a lot of effort to get there. But we're going to cover a bunch of tips talking about filtering water. We're going to talk about prioritizing or making the right priorities, distance versus getting the right amount of hydration and breaks and stuff like that. We're going to talk about pre-planning, especially your water sources, knowing where they are and planning if they're not, maybe they've dried up. We're going to talk about planning enough downtime to rest and enjoy the places you're going, especially you never know what you're going to see when you get out there. If you over-plan your trip to just kind of go, do a whole bunch of kilometers, you may end up missing the whole point of why you're there. And also we're going to talk about planning, how to plan for those big hiking days, what to do, what not to do, having a little bit of flexibility in your plans to try to avoid injury, SOS calls, or maybe even death in some cases. So lots of planning items here, but we are going to talk about these tips in a bit more detail, things that we learned from our multiple trips into Kakwa, and let's get into them. So the first item that we're going to talk about is, I was going to title this Be Careful, but instead of that I'm going to say use wisdom when drinking water in the backcountry. Use wisdom when drinking water in the backcountry. Typically, I'm using a water filter, and this is especially important in my opinion from experience, many backcountry trips, from day hikes and multi-day trips, when drinking from lakes and ponds, sources of water that are kind of still and stagnant somewhat. Any lake, even if it's fed from a glacier and whatever. When we were at Shangri-la, the lake was quite actually disgusting from the the silt and the dirt and all the other stuff that was flowing into that lake from the glacier. So you just don't know. And I did end up getting sick several times when we went to Kakwa. I think the first time that I went with Gerald up at Wishaw Lake, when we first got to the lake there, and kind of part and parcel of this is use wisdom. I had a water filter on me. I kind of wanted to use it, but I was having trouble with it. I hadn't tested it before going out, hadn't used it all year. And when I needed to use it, I had trouble. There's nothing wrong with the filter, but I was having a problem with it because I was using it incorrectly. So whether it's not remembering the right way to use it, or there's something wrong, maybe it's plugged, maybe it's faulty or defective, use wisdom. Make sure you test critical gear before you go out. And also make sure you know when it's really, really important to use. Now, some people are going to put in the comments there, man, you should filter all water all the time. Well, that just hasn't been our experience in terms of basically most alpine creeks that we cross. Anything that's flowing somewhat, the rocks, the gravel, is doing a pretty good job filtering. As long as you can see upstream somewhat, a lot of that stuff seems to get filtered. I've never gotten sick from drinking. When I look at the water, I look what's in it. When I put it in the bottle, I see if there's big chunks of stuff floating, and I carefully consider. I know bacteria and viruses are microscopic. All I'm saying is with hundreds and hundreds of creeks that we've drunk from all over northern BC, I've never gotten sick once from creeks, but I definitely have gotten sick from drinking from lakes and streams, water sources that are just sitting still, they tend to have, mosquito larvae and other bugs and stuff like that, and other bacteria easily produces in those environments much more than, say, something that's flowing that gets filtered. So just consider that. Test your critical gear. Make sure you have a water filter. Make sure you know how to use it. Make sure it's working. Make sure it's been tested. And make sure you know when it's especially important to use it, because water is an essential part of life, and it's going to be a deal breaker when you're out there in the backcountry. All right, so the next point that we want to cover in this video is to never prioritize distance above the essentials. What do I mean by that? You might be tempted to say, oh, we're going to have a 20, 30, 40 or more kilometer day, and to push that distance, maybe you will skip a few times when you would normally sit down and have a drink. You'd have your electrolytes, you would be eating food, maybe you'd be resting your body. And because you're pushing so hard, it makes for quite a tough day, a lot less enjoyable of a trip. You definitely weaken yourself. Guys, it's really hard to drink enough water when you're on a long trip in a remote area with restricted water sources, even under perfect conditions, right? When you're in the backcountry, when you're in the mountains, you might be tempted to plan a long daily distance and, skip those important rest stops where you get that critical recharging taking place. It always comes at a risky cost, a risky price indeed. If other factors mix into that choice that you made about having that long day and skipping when you should be drinking and resting and eating, you could be in big trouble. Things like, the water source that you're at now because you skipped one or two previous spots just so you could keep pushing to get that distance. Maybe it's dried up. And so now you don't get to refill your water. And physical, mental weakness, right? Both of those, remember, they're two different things. Mentally, you start making bad choices. Your mind just isn't thinking right. You're just focused on that distance. And, maybe you definitely should be stopping. You are in dehydration or whatever, or your body's really tired, but you're like, I got to get to this place. And, now you're going to run into injury. Higher chance of bad choices leading to injury, and now you're further away from where you were before. So even if you do need help, if you do get injured, you're even further away, right? That extra distance just compounds. So one bad decision leads to another, leads to bad outcomes. Now it's raining and you're not close to a water source, or you're on a steeper terrain and you can't rest here because there's nowhere safe to stop. So just those terrible choices because you're convinced yourself that you have to go that distance to get somewhere. Don't put yourself under those situations. In our trip, when we went out to the Jarvis Lakes cabin, and coming back from Jarvis to make our way back to the trailhead, of course, in our minds, the trip was over. Now we just had to hike out. We hiked a long distance, and it was very hot. It was like 30 degrees Celsius. The sun was beating down on us. We didn't really have much tree cover at all once we hit the main road. Started getting headaches and didn't necessarily stop at all the water sources. And it was a bad trip home. Got blisters on our feet. Lips were parched. Didn't stop enough. And we were just definitely dehydrated. And so it made for a really not fun time on the way home. On the next day, our feet were quite blistered and we were quite dehydrated. Now, on the last day, we did stop a bit more to get drinks and whatnot, but it just made for a not fun time. Just give yourself enough time to do what you have to do instead of pushing those really hard days. Our trip into Shangri-la, on the other hand, went much better. We gave ourselves proper rests. We stopped plenty of times. There was a lot of bushwhacking in that one. We drank plenty of water and had our electrolytes, had our food, rested when it made sense. And it was just a really pleasant trip, in and out. Even though there was difficulties overall, because we didn't push ourselves super hard and put ourselves under the gun, with the amount of time allotted, it was a much better trip. So just consider all those points and make sure you do not prioritize distance above the essentials. That's just a recipe for injury and other bad outcomes. Let's move on to the next point. All right, starting on to the third point. This is, again, talking about water. The item is to carefully pre-plan your water sources. I know I've been talking about water a lot, but there's just so many aspects to this. And really, this is about where you're going to get your next refill of water. You might have to carry more water for those longer distances where water sources aren't certain. You're not sure, maybe you've never been there. You're not sure if it will be dried up. When we went on our Edge Grain multi-day trip into Kakwa, heading on that side of the mountains there towards the Guardian and where all the cliffs and rocks were, there was just about no water, that whole section. I think it took us at least 2 or 3 hours of hiking. It was really hot. Really no tree cover or very minor amounts of brush there. You're just baking in the sun, and if it's raining, you're going to get soaked. You're just exposed on the side of the mountain there. And we're following this game trail, which would come and go. And that area just had, and some of the creeks, like I was actually concerned that we may not be able to cross some of those creeks that were supposedly there on the map. And it really comes down to the time of year, but and that's another thing when you plan your water sources. What time of year are you coming in? Is it later in the summer, early in the summer, where the flows may be pretty low or non-existent, or is it right in the middle of high flow? And the time of day, of course, is going to affect the amount of water flow. But we came to this one creek where I thought, oh, for sure we'll get more water there. And when we came to that area, I mean, big, huge banks there. Like 15 feet high, you had to climb down into the creek bed. We just barely saw a trickle, a small little puddle, which definitely you're not going to just drink directly from that. You have to filter that because it's like a little, small little puddle at that point, and bacteria and whatnot going to grow in there like crazy, and mosquitoes are going to hatch their eggs in there and whatnot. But that was the only water that we saw on the side of that hill, and it was pretty hot. And even after that, when we got to the pass where we could look down at Edge Green Lake, no water until we got all the way down to the lake. So, pretty much we were hiking most of the day with no water sources. The only water source we had there was that flat top at the bottom of that valley. And it was great water there, but that was really our last opportunity for water. So carefully pre-plan where you're going to get your water from. You should always carry extra water just in case. If there's more than one of you, if you're not alone, make sure you guys are keeping an eye on that. Pre-plan those water sources. They may be dry. Keep that water filter easily accessible so you're not tempted to not filter it, as I mentioned in the first point. And plan backup sources. In this case, on the edge of this mountainside going towards Edge Green Lake, there was a large river at the bottom of the valley. Now, you don't want to have to go hike down there. You're going to waste hours of time and you're going to lose elevation and have to regain it. But you know what? For the sake of water, if that's what you have to do, that's going to be the difference maybe between bailing out on the whole trip, being super dehydrated, and maybe being successful in that trip. You may have to cut some of your objectives because, the extra time it takes to get to that backup water source, but pre-plan it, guys. Pre-plan, if I don't get these water sources here, worst case, I can go down into the valley to that river, which is always flowing, get some water there. Also, plot those side creeks. If this creek is dried up, maybe another one. It's got trees and maybe it's flowing there. Maybe it's under the rocks. And you can get some water. Carefully pre-plan your water sources. That's a super important item to consider. Move on to the next point. All right, moving on to point number 4. This item would be to plan enough downtime for rest and for enjoying an epic location. maybe it's a great spot to go for a swim to rejuvenate your body, let the swelling go down. Maybe there's some good fishing there. Maybe there's good exploring to be had there. I think of places like the Kakwa Lake Cabin, Edge Green Lake, the Jarvis Lakes Cabin, or the Shangri-La area there at the lake where we explored. Just don't plan every minute to be hiking somewhere, And just here's a key item to consider in this. Be ready to adjust your plans based on what you see in person. Can't do everything from a map or satellite view. Sometimes when you get to a spot, you're like, man, based on what I see, I want to go there, I want to go there. You can make your default plan ABC, but be ready to adjust those plans. Be willing to adjust those plans when you get to a spot in person and say, you know what, we're just going to stay here and explore. It's just epic here. The other stuff will have to be for another trip. Like the trip to Edge Green Lake, we did not go to the Jarvis Lakes Cabin. We had originally planned, we'll get to Edge Green Lake and then we'll hike down the valley to Jarvis Lake Cabin and do a bunch of stuff there. But instead of that, we kind of looked at what we had come through, how much time we had, and we said, nah, we're not going to do that. It looks like a lot of extra bushwhacking. Based on the time that we have, based on the weather conditions, we'll just go to that lake at the bottom of Mount Ida for a shorter day. We'll have plenty of rest before the next big day heading out. It made a huge difference in our enjoyment and the safety of the whole trip. So Edge Green was a great trip. The trip to Jarvis Lakes Cabin and Moonius was way more distance. We planned all this distance, and for the time that we had, it was a lot harder to enjoy. I'm not saying we didn't enjoy it, but it kind of almost became like through hiking at that point, because we had big long days with 50-pound packs to get to this point, to get to that point. Maybe you can't avoid it, but if you can pre-plan, to not do that, you're going to have a much better time, much less chance of injury. And if the weather turns bad, you're going to have a buffer to handle that. Our trip into Shangri-La, we had plenty of rest, lots of time to eat berries and drink water, didn't get dehydrated, and it was just a fantastic trip in and out of Shangri-La. Gave yourself the proper amount of time. So just plan enough downtime for rest and enjoying the area. It'll make a huge difference. Move on to the last point. All right, let's get into our final point, and that would be to plan big hiking days around appropriate conditions. So you want to look at things like weather conditions, temperatures, too hot, too cold, moisture, how wet is it, and for the slope that you're going on, lots of vegetation, slippery rock. Is it very smoky from forest fires? Is there lots of flooding based on the time of year, time of day? Do not hike in rainy or very hot weather on steep, open, slippery slopes. That's a slippery slope to do so, so to speak. Or in large, deep water crossings at the wrong time of day or the wrong season. You might get yourself into trouble. Tough bushwhacking as well, like when it's weather's really windy or really rainy and you're pushing through brush, you're going to get yourself not just wet, which isn't too big of a deal, but it's really the what comes with that, and that's going to be, of course, you're going to be freezing cold. You're going to risk hypothermia. Your also feet are going to get soaking wet, which means blisters, which is just a cascading set of disaster. See if you can delay a day or two when required, if that weather conditions are really not on your side. Have a way to get current weather conditions in the location that you're in. These InReach and InReach mini devices, you can just click a button, get yourself an up-to-date weather forecast, and it'll give you pretty detailed information about that, and you can make decisions based on that. We usually use that forecast feature the night before, and we just see, in 2 or 3 days there's persistent rain coming. It's going to be there for 3, 4, or 5 days, lots of rain, and we're just going to get out of here. We're going to start leaving now while the getting's good. Even if you're not fully out of the rain, at least you're not doing long days in tricky terrain. You can kind of plan around that as best as possible. You're not going to be 100%. Sometimes even the forecast will be off, but don't plan for disaster. That's how SOS calls are born. That's how injury and death is born. Poor pre-planning, pushing ahead when your gut tells you you shouldn't, You can be late back to work, but you can't be early to be resurrected from the dead. So just consider that, when we see a lot of persistent rain coming, or just conditions are not going to be good, lots of forest fire smoke or something like that, right? You want weather and smoke forecasts as much as possible for your area, while we try to get closer to the trailhead to avoid those long days in terrible conditions. And water crossings as well. If you see a lot of rain coming, what was an easy water crossing today, tomorrow won't be. So plan those big hiking days around the appropriate conditions, and hopefully all goes well for you. Hope these 5 tips were useful to you. If they weren't, leave a comment below. Share your experience. If you enjoyed this video or series of videos, things I learned from some of my backpacking trips, please click the like button and share with others, and I will catch you on the next video. Thanks.